For decades, Black women have faced barriers to swimming. Much of this stems from historical segregation across swimming spaces, cultural myths about bodies of water, and a lack of access to swim instruction in Black communities. For many Black women, the added challenge of our hair maintenance, such as chlorine damage and ill-fitting swim caps, has made swimming even more unwelcoming. In fact, nearly 70% of Black adult women have little or no swimming ability. Tragically, this contributes to the reality that Black individuals are 5 times more likely to drown than their white peers. But the tide is turning. To discuss the ways in which Black women are reclaiming their spaces across water bodies, we're in conversation with Dr. Dawn Norwood, an associate professor and the interim department chair at Queen's University of Charlotte in the Department of Health and Human Performance. Dr. Norwood's scholarly expertise centers issues of race and gender in sports, and she's published extensively about Black women and swimming spaces. It seems lately that there's been a real focus on Black women in swimming. We're beginning to see some celebrities, if we want to put that, like Aaliyah Atkinson, there's Alice Deering, Leah Neal. But we know there's a long history about this narrative that Black women don't swim. What's going on with that? How did we get to that stage?
Well, I think if you go back and trace the origins of this culturally, historically, we have had an arduous relationship, Black folk, that is, with water and large bodies of water as we were transported through the slave trade. And so most of the times, a lot of times when enslaved people were transported, instead of this unknown terror that they were going to face where they were going, a lot of people just committed suicide and jumped over. People died from sickness during the slave trade, and bodies were just tossed over like they were nothing. And so if you can imagine what that does to the psyche of the people who are being transported, that is a horrible thing to have to witness and live through. And so you start to relate these negative feelings and these feelings of panic, anxiety with this body of water and then other bodies of water. And then we start to tell those stories to our kids. And we say, listen, once upon a time, this scary thing happened with the slave trade. Of course, they're not using those terms, but for that reason, don't go by that water. And so we start to perpetuate that from generation to generation. And then it becomes this part of the Black identity that Black people don't swim. And then when we want to pare that down even more, we hear that Black women don't swim for a plethora of reasons, but I guess we'll get there.
I think it's really important how you talked about this sort of intergenerational trauma that's gone back generations about water, and we often don't think about that. How did that bring you to doing this work? Did that have any influence on your narrative as an academic to study this phenomenon?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I will say the way that I actually came to the topic was very organic, and it was through a conversation with another friend of mine, a female friend. And oddly, we were talking about keeping in shape and how can I be healthy and what's the best exercise to get me an all around workout. And we both agreed that that would be swimming, of course, right? And so I thought about it for a second and we both started laughing. I said, but that's not going to happen because I'm not getting ready to keep my hair up like that. and so we just started laughing about it. And it was like, well, what could you do for your hair if you did do this? And then it became exhausting to think about. And then it became more, the conversation turned more to, why is it that we hold ourselves back from health benefits because of our hair? And then we were like, that's deep. And then it became a dissertation. So fast forward, and it was a dissertation. And for me, I started to think about my own swimming ability, how I even learned how to swim, how good could I actually swim, and what did I notice about my upbringing that directly impacted my own swimming ability. My mom didn't swim. My dad was actually in the Navy, but he didn't even teach us to swim.
Right.
And so it's kind of odd, but it makes sense because also my mom is our primary caretaker with the girls in the fam. And so she was responsible for our upkeep and maintaining our hair. And so, like a lot of Black girls, I went through the whole rituals of getting your hair pressed and once it gets pressed, don't go outside running and playing, and God forbid, don't get near any water because your hair is going to revert back to the natural coarse, texture. And then all this work would have been for nothing. And you're going to look terrible at church tomorrow. And this was a shared experience, I think, in the Black community among Black girls and women. And so that's how, I came to this subject and how it related back to my own experiences as a little girl growing up.
I think the hair is a huge issue.
It is. It just is. When I was doing my research initially, and this was back in 2010, all of the women that I interviewed for that piece said that hair was a barrier or a constraint to them swimming, learning how to swim, continuing to swim, even if they knew how. And it was always an issue of the hair. And so it was, how am I going to keep my hair dry? And if my hair gets wet, how I don't have the money to get it fixed. I don't know how to fix it myself. Or if I've gotten my hair done already, I'm definitely not going to get in the swimming pool because then it's a waste of money. But again, that ties back to, cultural practices that have been long held in the Black community for so long. And it has bled over into, even the adult life. And so with the hair, it is a big thing. I know even outside of swimming, just for Black girls to be active in sports and athletics and health and fitness, the hair is always an issue. And it stems a lot from us not being, initially not being comfortable with our natural state of hair, and then using the relaxers and other types of straighteners. But I also find that even with natural hair, there's so much more maintenance that has to still be done. And again, this is for us to present in the best way possible in society, showing up on our jobs, because we know there's an issue with your hair, how it looks, a la the Crown Act. Those types of things we always have to take into consideration before we just jump in a pool.
Why don't you explain for everyone what we're talking about when we say that Black women have to worry about their hair? What are we worrying about?
Okay, so when we're talking about this hair thing with Black women, historically, Black women have tried to reach a certain level of aesthetic beauty or that is acceptable. And it was basically the white standard of beauty. So light skin, fair skin, soft features, straight hair, or nice long curly hair. And so clearly you look at that and Blacks have tried to reach that standard. Also, too, when you've had mixed enslaved people who were light enough at a certain point to pass after slavery because they had that straight textured hair. And so, of course, if you're looking at that and you see, oh, that's better preferential treatment if I look closer to this standard of beauty. And so for decades, decades, for years, Blacks have tried to, through the beauty industry, use products that would straighten their hair. It's called a perm. So a perm cream product you put on your hair, it's a chemical product. It straightens the hair, keeps it straight for a certain amount of time, and then you have to reapply it ever so often to maintain that straightness.
Right.
Okay. You can also get a straight look through using a hot comb, popularized by Madam C.J. Walker. That hot comb, you can press it and it straightens the hair. It's excruciating to sit through that, but you're literally putting a hot comb that you get off of a stove from the fire onto your hair to straighten it, again, because we're trying to match this standard that has already been set for us. And so when you do that, again, these are temporary straighteners. They will not maintain that way. If it comes in contact with water, perspiration, sweat, rain, humidity, that it will make your hair revert back to its natural state, what we call natural state. That means without any chemical, without any type of straightener. And then you get the more coarse, thick texture of the hair that sometimes is deemed unacceptable to white America and not appropriate. So even with, things like, when Blacks wear afros during the 70s, that was an issue. The afro, it was a statement. It was too political of Black women have had to contend with their hair forever. And that's why it's a big deal also when it comes to swimming. And that's what we're talking about when I say natural and can't get it wet. That's why.
So there was a lot of segregation and a lot of barriers and limitations that the white community and larger American society placed on Blacks in swimming. Can you comment on that and how that's tied into our experiences in the United States?
When we hear about segregation, we kind of tend to think of the schools being segregated or Blacks not being able to ride in the front of a bus, but it also extended to recreational activities. And so therefore, public pools were also segregated. Black people were not allowed to swim in any public pools. And definitely there were these stereotypes and myths around Black bodies. And if a Black person got into a pool, then the pool was damaged. It had to be, cleaned, and it was no longer good enough for white bodies to then enter that space because it had been tainted by the other. And so this kept Black folk away from pools on top of the cultural constraints that were keeping them away. And so when you get to this space after Civil Rights Act has been passed and segregation has been outlawed, you have these spaces that still are not really open and welcoming for Black folk. And even if they are, you're fighting against decades and decades of stereotypes, of being denied access, of cultural constraints, then you get to that point where it just does not become a priority or a preferred activity for Black people to engage in.
There's also this pushing of Black bodies and how people look at them, which you touched on. What's your opinion on how Black bodies and how people look at them are also shaping the responses to Black women in swimming?
So that one is really interesting. And that's a kind of a loaded question because it has a lot of different moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you talk about Black women and Black bodies and the whole concept of being seen in swimwear, that can pose a challenge to Black girls and Black women because historically, we do not set the beauty standard.
Right.
Eurocentric standards of beauty are what is at the paramount. And we have historically, whether consciously or subconsciously, we have strived to meet that standard. And so when you look at everything else that is set up in our society, it is from a white perspective for the most part. So it trickles down into everything, including fashion. And so a lot of times when we're talking about what type of, swimwear is out there for the more full body features that historically Black women have had, it has not been celebrated. And so the Black body itself, especially the Black female body, has been undervalued, devalued. And so to ask then that person to put that body in swimwear and then go to this public space to be on display and then be judged for my body that I know you don't value in this skin anyway, I'm not going to even deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I know that was a real deep, all the way around the world answer, but I think that it's just to illustrate how interlocking and how deeply woven these cultural barriers are and how racism and stereotypes plague us in so many facets of our lives. And then again, when you also talk about just Black bodies in general, we talk about from the scientific and biological side, how those stereotypes have been perpetuated, that Black bodies are just too dense. We can't float. So we're going to automatically sink to the bottom. And so there then puts out another notice of this is not for Black people. Stay away.
So what were some of the other big findings that you found from your research?
For some, it was just they didn't have access to it. It wasn't something that was offered to them in their neighborhood. They did not have a public pool to go to. They did not have private pools to go to, like country club pools and things like that. Live near a beach or on water or anything like that. But ironically, though, the number one factor that was listed among all of them was the issue of their hair.
Right.
And so even though I had some that just said they were just scared that they were going to drown. That's a legitimate fear. Right. But a lot of what held the majority of my respondents back, they talked about the hair.
Which is really sad because I know a lot of the research that you talked about and other research talks about that it's a great fitness activity and it's a low stress fitness activity. And for a lot of Black women, particularly with the health concerns we have, swimming would be an ideal activity.
It absolutely would. And I'll give you an example, and I'll use myself as an example, which I like to do with my students as well to, show that, hey, we're not that far removed from these things that we're talking about and we're researching. I can swim, maybe good enough to save my life if I have to. I could not do it to save anyone else's life.
Right.
It also is not an activity that I indulge in on a regular or consistent basis at all. Right. And a main primary factor for that for me is my hair, the upkeep, because I know when I do go swimming, my hair is going to be wet. Right. And then that is going to entail another 2-3 hours maybe of me putting it back into some style that I feel comfortable enough with to go out into the workspace where I'm going to be with my white peers who I know research has shown has judgment on me just based on the way my hair looks at work. Right. And so when you think about it like that, and again, I am the researcher. I know the statistics. I know that drowning deaths are up among Black people about 28% from 2019 to 2022. And then we have some of the highest drowning deaths right behind Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders. They just overtook us with the highest amount of drowning rates and inability to swim. But the highest reported inability to swim among races are Black females.
Wow.
Black females. Black males at a time drowned at the highest rate. They engage in the activity more than we do. So their drowning rates are higher. Our self-reported swimming ability is low because we don't even engage.
I totally understand. I think about that, and even in terms of how we pick vacations or how we want to spend our leisure time. We're not stepping in.
When we go to a pool party, we don't go to get in the pool. We
Right.
stand around the pool. And I've been in those spaces where literally we're at a pool party. There's hardly nobody in the pool. We're standing around. None of the females want to get in the pool and don't splash water because they don't want their hair wet. And it seems like such a trivial thing. But when you really start to unpack it and look at the roots of it and how we got here and its implications, it becomes a very serious matter.
What's really sad is that water is such a healing space. Even if it's not swimming, being in water, and we look at some of our rituals, water is so tied to things that we do spiritually, religiously. Do you see Black women reclaiming swimming or water rituals as a space despite these legitimate barriers you've brought up?
You know, I would like to be very optimistic and say that I do see, some huge improvement there, and us still making way for participation in water related activities. But the research doesn't show that we're trending that way. I first came into this research and started doing this around 2008. 2010 is when I did my full study, and nothing really has changed from then till today, numbers wise, about where we are with Black women and their swimming ability. Black girls, the drowning death rates are still high. And so unfortunately, I think it's going to take a lot of unlearning as a culture. And that is going to be done through grassroots organizations and programming, where it has to be more of a call to action. So getting more of our Black organizations involved, spearheading these types of efforts through our sororities, making Learn to Swim programs part of your service activities to the community. It's going to take things like that and more debunking of the myths, so that then we start to create a new generation of Black folk who are not afraid to interact with the water.
What about the representation? We're seeing more and more Black women taking over the Olympics. We have Natalie Hines, Aaliyah Atkinson, Alice Deering, I mentioned earlier. Do you think this type of representation is changing things in any way?
Yeah, I think representation is everything. I can still, as at my age, I still remember the first Black female tennis player I saw on TV, and I was amazed because I had never seen that before. So when I saw Zena Garrison, I then started to put myself in that place. I think by us seeing more Blacks and Black women involved in swimming, it sparked somewhat of an interest. And then another thing that is exciting is you start to get more people into the space of creating swim caps that are more that are easier to use, and that also serve a better purpose of keeping your hair dry. That has also been the big deal too, because I get a lot of people that will say, and some of my white readers will say, well, I don't understand what the big deal is. Why don't you just put on a swim cap and your hair won't get wet? And I have to correct them and say, well, actually, that wasn't the original intended purpose of a swim cap. It was to keep your hair out of your face and to keep it out of the drain from getting caught in the drains while you're swimming. It wasn't designed necessarily to keep the hair dry. That wasn't the initial intended purpose. But now with more Black women coming around and being more entrepreneurial and looking to see those needs in the Black community, we're seeing some new products hit the shelves now that do just that. So then it takes that cultural constraint away from women, Black women, so that then now they have a chance to actually participate and not have to worry as much about that hair constraint as before.
So what would a fully inclusive, equitable swimming culture look like for you?
It looks more like a community-centered activity, community sponsored activity, or doing things in groups. I think that one of the things that I talked about in some work that I did before about a call to action to ameliorate the drowning deaths in the Black community. And it was talking about just with even say the sororities, partnering, come together within that sorority and make it a sisterhood event. Make it a sisterhood challenge of private lessons just for you and your sorors. And you all are doing this task together. And so it's bonding, it's sisterhood building, but then it's also meeting the needs of your health and improving your overall mobility and your overall heart health, which we know is a big deal among Black women. We are some of the leading causes of heart disease. And so I think something like that, when you come together and you build it into community, it becomes less daunting and it becomes something that you can share with your neighbor. It takes the stigma out of it, the stereotypes out of it, and then it becomes a fun activity that you can look forward to. That's what that looks like for me.
So you're a researcher. You said you're a semi-swimmer when you're ready. So what would you say today if a Black woman said to you something like, swimming isn't for me, it's not something I can do?
I would say that swimming can be for anybody, including you. I would recommend that they start in some easy learn to swim programs, that they are out there. But I would really have to tell them, listen, don't forget about what you heard. Don't think about what you heard. Let me tell you what swimming can do and the benefits it offers to you. Then we'll figure out after a while that, is the hair that big of a deal or no? But I think that when I do hear people say, even my son, sometimes when he comes to me, Mommy, I'm scared. I say, son, don't be afraid. It's okay. You can do this. And again, with my friends, and we talk about going on vacation and they want no water. I don't want to get in the water. I said, look, you're keeping yourself from so many new adventures and opportunities simply because you don't know how to swim. And you won't try to swim because of your hair. There are ways around that. Let me show you how.
So I know this is just one piece of your large body of research. What's coming next for you, Dr. Norwood?
Well, I am pivoting and turning my attention to my original passion, which is the WNBA, and looking at women in sports in general, especially at the professional level, but particularly honing in on male attitudes and perceptions of the WNBA and women's sports as a whole, looking also to see if a mitigating factor to their attitudes and opinions has to do with their own athletic involvement in their lives, and if that lends any kind of appreciation for the women's side. So we'll be looking to see what kind of data I get from that. I'm really excited about that.
We were just talking with Dr. Dawn Norwood, who shared her insights from her research examining Black women's swimming experiences. To explore more of Dr. Norwood's work, including her upcoming new research on the WNBA, visit this episode's page on the Psychology of Black Womanhood website. Thanks for joining us on the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast. We've got some amazing guests lined up for upcoming shows, so be sure to check out our episode topics by visiting our website at www.psychologyofblackwomanhood.com. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date and support the podcast, please share it with your friends and family. You can also show your love by following the podcast and leaving a rating and review. Be sure to tune into our next episode in 2 weeks, when we'll be centering even more research in the real world about Black women's experiences.